Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to learn voice, and at the end of the video you will see how easy voice looks like and how simpler it's easy to understand. So let's get started. Now what is voice? Let's look at it as voice is a form of a verb that indicates whether the subject of the sentence performs or receives the action. Here, we need to focus on these two words. One is performs and the other one is receives. Now, both are opposite to each other. Now, if the subject performs the action, the verb is in the active voice. And if the subject receives the action, the verb is said to be in the passive form. Let's look at this example and try to understand. Now, when we change from active voice to passive voice, we just need to do only a simple task. And that task is change of the position of subject and object in passive voice. Now here we can see Rita paints a picture. Here Rita is the subject and picture is the object. Now when we change this active voice to passive voice, we just need to do the interchanging of the position of subject and object. I mean to say, we bring, please follow the arrows, we bring the object of the active voice to the subject position of the passive voice, and then we bring the subject of the active voice to the object position of the passive voice. Now here we need to focus on the word position. I am not interchanging of subject and object. Rather, I am saying interchanging of the position of subject and object. So the final outcome, that is, this particular sentence in active voice can be changed to passive voice by this simple task of interchanging the subject and object position, and then we get the passive voice. A picture is painted by Rita. Now, verbs in the active voice can be either transitive or intransitive. Now we need to know what are transitive verbs and what are intransitive verbs. Okay, so transitive verbs are the verbs that have objects, and intransitive verbs are the verbs that do not have any object in sentences. So we need to note that only transitive verbs can be used in passive voice. That means a sentence in active voice, if that sentence has a verb which is transitive, that sentence can only be changed to passive voice. On the other hand, if we have a sentence in active voice where this verb is intransitive, that means it has no object, then it is not possible to change that active voice sentence with intransitive verb to passive voice. And you know the reason very well, because we need the subject and the object for interchanging of the positions from active to passive voice. If there is no object, there can't be interchanging of subject and object position. And that's the reason why intransitive verbs cannot be changed to passive voice. Now, let us straight away look at the passive voice formation. The very first change we observed from active to passive voice change is the change of personal pronouns. So here is the list of the personal pronouns in active and passive voice. I becomes me, we becomes us, he becomes him, she becomes her, they becomes them. The second change is we see change of verbs in passive voice. Now this is the structure of the verb in passive voice. Remember that the verb in the passive voice always comprises a form of the verb be and the past participle of the main verb. The form of the verb be and the helping verb, if any, indicate the tense of the sentence. For example, she is liked by all. The mangoes have been brought by them. Now, in the first sentence, she is liked by all is indicates the sentence is in the simple present tense. Now, in the second sentence, have been, the mangoes have been brought by them. Have been denotes the present perfect tense. Now, let us look at this table. This will make the entire process of changing from active voice to passive voice very easy for you all. Now let us look at the very first tense, simple present tense. Let's take the example, Hurry bakes a cake. This is active voice. Now when we change it to passive voice, let us again do the process of interchanging of subject and object positions. And along with that, we will keep in mind the change in the verb along with tense in mind. Hurry bakes a cake is in simple present tense, passive voice. A cake is baked by Hurry. Now, let's look at the next tense, simple past tense. Hurry baked a cake, passive voice. A cake was baked by Hurry. So baked becomes was baked in passive voice, and here we have to keep in mind the number, whether the subject is singular or plural. If we have the thing in the subject place as singular, the verb will go accordingly, and if it's plural, the verb will go accordingly. So cake is plural, so was baked. Had it been cakes, the cakes, then it would have been were baked. Now simple future tense, Hurry will bake a cake will be baked by Hurry. present continuous tense. Hari is baking a cake. A cake is being baked by Hari. So in continuous tense, we need to add being in the verb structure. Next, past continuous tense. Hari was baking a cake. A cake was being baked by Hari. So is baking becomes is being baked, and was baking becomes was being baked. Coming to perfect tense, present perfect tense. Here also we need to add something in the passive voice in the verb structure. Yes, you guessed it right. That is BEEN. Hari has baked a cake. A cake has been baked by Hari. Past perfect tense. Hari had baked a cake. A cake had been baked by Hari. Future perfect tense. Hari will have baked a cake. A cake will have been baked by Hari. The tense of the active sentence needs to remain the same in the passive construction. However, the verb in the passive construction must agree with the passive subject. Now, we will look at the passive construction of ditransitive verbs. Now, what are these ditransitive verbs? As the term ditransitive itself says that it has got two, something, there are two, di means two. And what are those two things? It means ditransitive verbs have two objects. That's why we call them ditransitive. So verbs with single objects are transitive verbs, and verbs with two objects are ditransitive verbs. Now look at these examples. Now, as the ditransitive verbs have two objects, direct object and indirect object. So when such a verb is put into the passive voice, either of the objects can become the subject. That is why sentences with ditransitive verbs can have two passive forms. That's why here we see, my aunt gifted me a laptop. In this particular sentence, gifted is the verb which has got two objects. One is direct object, that is the laptop, and one is the indirect object, that is me. IO is the indirect object, me, and DO is the direct object, laptop. So when we change it into passive voice, we can have two forms. Either we bring the direct object to the subject position, or we bring the indirect object to the subject position in passive voice. So with the direct object in the subject position, we will have a laptop was given to me by my aunt, and the indirect object in the subject position will give us me will become I. I was gifted a laptop by my aunt. So, we need to note that in the given two passive constructions of the active sentence, both the direct object and the indirect object can act as the passive subject. It is also possible to have an agentless passive where the doer or the agent of the action is omitted. So if we look at the second passive construction, I was gifted a laptop. If we omit by my aunt, it becomes agentless. So simply, I was gifted a laptop. Now let us look at the passive construction of phrasal verbs. Now what are phrasal verbs? We need to know that it's a combination of verb being followed by a preposition. So in this case, prepositions that are part of phrasal verbs remain intact in passive voice. So these are some examples of phrasal verbs like look after, turn off, look into, take away, take down, and the list goes on and on. Now let us look at the change of voice of phrasal verbs when we change a sentence from active voice to passive voice. My sister looks after me. So, as we already learned that the phrasal verb remains intact, the preposition remains intact, so the passive voice will be I am looked after by my sister. So, after has to go with the verb look. Now, let us look at passive construction of interrogative sentences. Before we start this, let me give you one more example of phrasal verb change from active voice to passive voice. If I say someone turned the lights off, active voice, and if we make it passive, the lights were turned off. The lights were turned off by someone, and here by someone can be omitted and it can become an agentless passive. The lights were turned off. Now, did you write this poem? We all can say that the type of sentence here in this particular example is interrogative sentence. So this is an interrogative sentence. Now, how to change an interrogative sentence from active voice to passive voice? Now look at this. We need to perform 3 steps when we change an interrogative sentence from active voice to passive voice. Now first, let us make it a statement, a declarative sentence in active voice. So, did you write this poem will become you wrote this poem in active voice, and as a declarative sentence it becomes you wrote this poem. I'm repeating, Let us change this interrogative sentence to a declarative sentence in active voice. So keeping in mind the tense, the number of subject, singular or plural, we get you wrote this poem. Now change this declarative sentence in active voice to passive voice. This poem, this is in past tense, simple past, active voice, so was written by you. So we got the passive voice of this declarative sentence. Now make the passive voice sentence interrogative. So this poem was written by you becomes, we make it interrogative, we take the auxiliary verb to the beginning of the sentence because we have to frame a question, an interrogative sentence. So was this poem written by you? So the passive construction of did you write this poem becomes was this poem written by you? So the passive interrogative sentence here is formed by following the rule of subject-verb inversion. That is, interchanging the position of the passive subject and the auxiliary verb. And the same rule is followed for changing the active sentence into an interrogative sentence. Now, let us look at the passive construction with modals. So these are a few modals that I have mentioned: will, can, could, may, shall, would, should. So sentences with modals can also be changed into the passive voice. Now quickly frame a sentence in active voice with any one of these modals. And then look at the structure of a phrase with modals in passive voice. So if your sentence is ready, let me take mine too. We must help the poor. This is active voice and the modal is we must help the poor. Now I'm going to change it into passive voice. The poor must be helped by us. So you have seen the modal must. It does not change its form. Okay, and what else? The base form of the verb is inserted between the modal and the main verb. Must be. So between poor, the poor must be helped by us. Between poor and helped is the main verb. We have inserted the verb must be helped. And the main verb, which is help, has changed into the past participle form, helped. So let's look at this. We must help others. Passive voice. Others must be helped by us. So I'm repeating. Here you see the modal must. It does not change its form in passive voice. It remains same, must. And what else has been done? The base form of the be verb is inserted between the modal and the main verb in passive voice. And the main verb, which is help, it changes into its past participle form, that is helped. So that's the structure. Modal plus be verb plus past participle, or the third form of the main verb. Now let us look at the passive construction of commands and notices. Let's look at commands. Write this down. This is a command which is in active voice. Now it can have two passive forms. For commands, we can use either of the two passive forms given. One is let this be written down, and the other one is this should be written down. While the active forms of such sentences usually have an implied subject, that is you, the passive forms of such commands are usually agentless passive. So in the first sentence, it begins with let, followed by the object of the sentence, this. So the structure is let plus passive subject, that is object, plus be plus past participle of the main verb. Let this be written down. And the second one, in the second passive form, it is written with should be, preceded by the object and followed by the past participle form of the main verb. The structure is passive subject, that means the object, plus should be plus past participle of the main verb. I'm repeating. In the first passive form, let plus passive subject, that means the object, plus be plus past participle of the main verb. And in the second passive form, object, that means the passive subject, plus should be, this should be written down, past participle form of the main verb. Now let me tell you, commands beginning with let retain the initial let in their passive construction while following the usual rule for voice change. Okay? Let him complete his work. Active voice and passive voice, let his work be completed. Please note, please everyone to note down that here notices this particular word will not come. So it's a mistake here. I am cutting it off. This is not a notice. Complete his work. Okay. So this particular sentence is not a notice. So we have seen that let him complete his work, active voice, sentence becomes let his work be completed. So let at the beginning of commands remain intact. Remain intact in the passive voice. Now, let us go to notices now. Notices can be written in passive voice. Look at the structure. So this is the structure of notice. Please look at the structure, the combination. Passive subject, that means the object, plus is or are, plus past participle form of the main verb. So let us look at it with an example. We accept credit cards. So this is a notice. So we change it into passive voice and then do the, the process of interchanging of subject object positions, and then we get credit cards are accepted. Credit cards are accepted. So children, I hope in a very short period of time, I tried to make voice simpler for you, and you also have been able to understand it well. If you have any queries, please do write to me in the comment box so that I can clarify your doubts further. Thank you and happy learning.